Welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Maxime Agostini on the show. Maxime, would love to get an intro from you for the audience and let them know who you are.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show. So I'm Maxime. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Sarus Technologies, which is a YC company. So we're based half in the US, half in France. I'm French. I'm also an entrepreneur. It's the second company I started with the first company 10 years ago. It was a marketing company that we eventually sold to AOL slash Verizon. And we started over with Sarus 4 years ago, and here I am.
That's a great background. Tell us about what Sarus is and why it's important.
Sarus is a privacy technology. We decided to solve the problem of leveraging sensitive private information for AI or analytics. Everyone's talking about AI. Everyone's talking about data with a lot of potential, but also people are realizing the potential risk attached to it. And we came up with this simple idea that if you want to leverage data for analytics tasks, you don't really need to see the data. What you really have to do is to be able to process it and extract knowledge from it. And that applies to analytics, medical research, AI research, all of it. Sharing the data itself is actually more of a problem than an opportunity. So we developed this software that is a proxy layer between a sensitive data source and a researcher, data scientist, that makes their life identical as if they have access to data, but fully protects data. So decided to start on this journey 4 years ago, and it's having an impact in a variety of sectors. A lot of it is in healthcare. You would think, of course, of medical research, but it goes beyond this. Their impulse to leverage sensitive data is common across all industries.
Yeah, and as some people probably know, I mean, the more data and the better the data, the better the AI, right? And data is becoming kind of the moat around AI. And you have all these pockets, especially in the US, of healthcare data. And they're not necessarily wanting to share that data, right? Because of privacy concerns and sometimes competitive concerns. But you can get these consortiums if you can have a technology like Sarus to say, "Hey, I'm willing and able to share my data in this way, as long as you can't get to the underlying data, because I know I'll benefit and you'll benefit." Can you talk to a little bit about that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to the word sharing data. We
Mm.
kind of like sounds obvious to everyone if you want to let someone do something with data, you need to share data. And at the end of the day, what you want to share is like the intrinsic knowledge within the data. And this is so that's very like intuitive, but also it's kind of abstract. And when you start talking about AI, especially in generative AI, where you could take as input any kind of data source, then you start to see the value, because there's data sources that could be of any kind that could be of value for someone else. If you have like patient records, this is extremely valuable for a researcher that's studying that particular disease somewhere else in the world. And you're not going to share this data. You're not going to send those patient records across the globe. But how can you make it so that you can still leverage it?
And now with cloud-enabled everything, I mean, this used to be harder when things didn't live in various clouds, but now, a researcher in France can collaborate easily with a researcher in California, say, on the same data set in an anonymized way. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the technical aspects of how you keep the data anonymized and safe and private.
Yeah. So yeah, first it's a good thing that you started with cloud. Cloud solved the scale of processing mobile phones kind of like solve the scale of data. Now you have more data. It's good place to start. Then we got cloud. It's like now we have ways to process like huge amounts of data. And the thing that never really scaled up until today is the governance. Like, how do you manage like who can do what with this data? So that's where we step in. Like we want to scale the ability to leverage and unlock this data. So you would traditionally think, okay, well, they've come up with a way to anonymize the data. It's true that if you do anonymize the data, you're probably safe and like free to go. And regulations are pretty clear with this. If data is anonymous, you fall outside of it. And it's all nice and fine, except that no one knows what it means. And researchers have looked into that and have tried to come up with a definition. And either they failed or eventually they just realized it's more complicated. And if you want to have some really robust definition, you need something that's not just taking a data point and redacting some of it and assuming this is okay. So that's a realization that it's kind of like around the year 2000 and so, and eventually led to a mathematical definition of privacy, which is called differential privacy. So that particular definition says, well, if you want something to be anonymous, you better have very, very high standards, because someone may know something that makes it possible to relate this information to someone. And by the way, even aggregates could be at risk. There was a paper from the US Census that famously used differential privacy in 2020 for the latest census. And they published a paper a few weeks back explaining why the previous methods they had, like all just like right before, which is 2010, were failing at protecting privacy because even publishing aggregates were not sufficient. So now you have this high standard, which is differential privacy, and say, well, we can define what is anonymous data, but by the way, you're out of luck. It's not just you take the data and you remove things. You have to give up on the idea. If you want it to be anonymous, you can take the data and you need to process it in a way that the output of the processing is anonymous, and it's got to be noisy if you want to reach those standards. And it's not like a strict necessity, but it's kind of have to be an aggregate. So now we have a definition that says, well, we can't anonymize data. We can only consider anonymizing aggregates, or pretty much. And so that's what we do at Sarus. We say, okay, well, we won't share the data because you can't anonymize the data, but we'll make sure the processing that you carry out on it are anonymous. So
and the way that might work is like if you're running some query, you can't run the query in such a way in your analytics tool that would get it to such a granular level that you could identify, call it small groups of people or like a handful of people.
Exactly, and even it could be that the query is fine, but you just happen to run the same query again in an hour. What happens with the difference? Like if there's just one new customer, what's the difference between now and next hour? So you need to think about those
anybody with a general sense of arithmetic could kind of say, oh, the average moved here a little bit. And I know we only had one customer sign up yesterday, and so you can just kind of dead reckon all of that. And now I know like the geographical difference and kind of the it's basically arithmetic or a geometry problem to kind of try to figure out, oh, okay, like that one person that came in must be an overweight male in California. That's me.
Exactly. And when you start realizing this, it's like, oh, shoot, my head hurts. This is going to be complicated. And luckily for you and for us, we did not have to come up with an answer. Researchers have done it, and really, it's well studied, well understood. Differential privacy is the main field of research in the privacy space, and all you have to do is apply those principles, and that's what we do at Sarus. We bring like this latest breakthrough in privacy research down to like the tools that people use every day. So the Azure cloud services or
Yeah.
like on top of their data warehouses and so on. Like we bring it directly into the
Yeah,
workflows.
it sits on top of the cloud store, whatever it is. It could be a data lake, data warehouse, could be Databricks, could be Snowflake, whatever it is, and just kind of sits there as an API layer. And the only way to access that black box of data is through your API layer, basically, right?
Exactly, and that's where you see like the partnership play. This is something that we build as a enhancer of all the existing data workflows, data companies. So obviously, you want to partner with the cloud vendors, data warehouses, but also like people bringing layers on top, because we are here to unlock this data, unlock the use cases, democratize the data for the purpose of analytics or AI.
Right. What is how important is privacy? I know Europe takes this so seriously, right? And I remember back in my ad tech days when GDPR came out, and before that we had to I was building mobile location data ad tech enabled services and products, and a lot of data products and audiences and things like that, and we had to take into account all the different laws of all the different countries, and how we could store, like, say, lat long coordinates. But it always seemed to me like, I think the importance of privacy depends almost like on your generation. Definitely like our parents' generation cares a lot more than we do, I think. Um, and I wonder, like, you know, from a design perspective, if you're designing data policies, would you want to? It's kind of like organ donation when you get your license. When you could say like I could opt in or opt out, and there's that choice architecture and behavioral economics, right? And I wonder if privacy could be the same thing, where you could construct a choice architecture around privacy is a opt-in rather than an opt-out, to a certain extent, right? Because, like, if my medical data, philosophically can help people, help save lives, it's just like I'm going to donate my body to research when I die or whatever. That, scientifically, that helps humanity. So I wonder, like, maybe you could wax poetic on that random collection of thoughts I just spewed out. But, you know, what are your thoughts on privacy generally, like that?
So it's intricate question. It's part of it is personal, part of it is collective.
Yeah,
Most
yeah,
people don't really care about their private data being collected and leveraged by like a big tech company. Some do,
yeah,
but most don't. And
yeah,
agree with you is probably different per generation, but still, like individually, we don't stand much to lose if this data is collected.
right.
And but the question is also at the collective level. Like it makes sense for regulators to question the fact that like one single tech company could know and impact and influence so many people. Even if every single one of them doesn't really care, it becomes like a societal question. So that's
It's
you
like a
have to
question.
also.
It's almost like a question of fairness and justice, right? Like, I think here in the U.S. we have this, like, real almost libertarian streak to us. As long as I don't care what you collect, as long as it doesn't impinge upon my freedom. And there's, like, the sense of justice. Like, if you use my data against me in, like, a nefarious way, or to deny me insurance, um, without my consent, there's, like, this justice kind of aspect to it.
So I think yeah, and the regulations really like define like do's and don'ts, and they're not. I mean, they're very strict in some regards, in the sense that registries, you have things that are very formal and that you have to comply with, but they still give a lot of freedom. For example, with consent, there's a lot of things you can do if you extract someone's consent, which at the end of the day just falls back to your opt-in opt-out kind of scenario where it you can do a lot of things with data as long as you notify users and you make sure they understand what's happening and you apply best practices. This is kind of for most industries. That's where we are.
Right, right.
Medical industries would be a bit different. It depends also per country and legislation. So it still gives us a lot of freedom. I would say that like part of what we solve is privacy. Part of what we solve is data security, which is probably like the other side of the same coin. Like you may not have to comply with particular regulation that prevents you from doing it. That doesn't mean you should do it.
Right.
You have a reputation. You have customers that trust you. If you find a way to make it 10 times better, you should probably do it.
And is the way that you guys do it 10 times better, I guess, than like how were people solving it before Sarus?
Well, depending on how you count, it's like even hundreds of times better in the
Right.
sense that
Right.
before Sarus, if you want to study a data set, you can have the data set on your computer and do anything you want with it. You can spend time looking for, I don't know, your ex-girlfriend in like Uber traces or stuff like this. If you play with this data set, the data is just there
Yeah.
on a computer.
Right.
And if it's on a computer, probably no one knows what you're ever going to do with it. Even, I mean, maybe it's still like behind a VPN. I'm sure there's security in place, but like still,
Yeah.
as a data scientist, as a researcher, you're free to do whatever. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's like it's the intuitive way of doing it, but you have access to all of it. When you use Sarus, you have access to none of it. Yeah. The only thing you can see is the output of your computation. So you define it, and I can share a bit more how you make it practical. But first, let's say how we make it secure. Like you don't see the data, and you define like
Yeah,
an
you
entire
get to see
pipeline.
basically kind of the analytic outputs, like the charts and the graphs and the histograms, and like how many people live in California, which is not invading anybody's privacy. It's like how many people with heart
Exactly.
disease in their 40s live
To
in
my left,
California,
there's like 1 billion data points, and the only thing you can see is like handful of data points, which is the graph described, for example.
Right. Right. Yeah, so that does make it a lot better. So who has the keys to the underlying data? So there's like layers of security in this case then, right? Because somebody has the keys to get into the data. And how do you kind of
So
like set up that in your organization? Yeah.
yeah, so we don't solve for this, and it's an interesting point you make. Like the privacy sector, you have like different families of privacy solutions. Part of it is really the security of the cloud, the security of the input data, sometimes called the input security or input privacy, which is about using encryption, using confidential computing and stuff like this. And
Yeah.
this is where you try to answer like who has the keys to the input
Right.
data and the compute area. We, Sarus, answer the question of the output privacy. So like what output are you allowed to extract? Like how can we make sure you don't bring the data with the output? So we're really experts in this. We partner with input security, input privacy technologies on the other side. And so there are different answers to your question depending on the setup. In most cases, the answer is as simple as the data admin of the hospital or something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And how's the go-to-market been going with some of the clouds? Have you gotten into any of the co-sell programs or marketplaces with any of the big clouds?
So we very early into this journey. I think so we see a lot of alignment. Like it's really in the strategy of the clouds to promote technology that unlock data use cases in the cloud. So we're very confident and we're not worried at all on the ability to replicate this across all of the clouds. That being said, we see some have more alignment in terms of their customers. It's not about technology. I think from a technology perspective, what we do could be applied to any of them. But we see
Right.
that we go more towards the enterprise sector, large corporates, banking. I would say Azure is our main partner as of today, even though
Yeah.
the other ones are completely relevant as well.
Right. Yeah, and you find that Microsoft tends to be in the largest corporations in the world. So if you're dealing with some of the
Yeah,
larger sectors, healthcare, finance, they'll
yeah,
tend to be running on Azure. Yeah.
and an interesting play with OpenAI recently at the same time. So there's like
Yeah, I
everyone
would
we
love to
talk
dig
to
into
has got
that.
this.
Yeah. Switching gears, talking about kind of the present with large language models and OpenAI and how does what you do get affected or affect kind of that whole platform shift that's happening?
So we've always talked to prospects about like privacy risk in deep learning models and AI models, and there are some impressive scientific papers that show that in like image model, you may be able to trace back some individuals from training set and so on.
Right.
This never
Right.
worked. No one ever really cared, and this all changed with LLMs. In the world of LLMs, the LLM, any large language model, can learn by heart and memorize input data.
Yeah. Kind of
Its
almost
public
like a
data
human
is,
can has a representation in its neural net of truth, right?
yeah,
And so you can ask it
exactly,
specific questions about that truth.
and so that's problematic. But what's even worse is that we don't know of any way to prevent it from leaking into prompts. And
Mm,
you could kind of like address the direct attacks where, for example, so if you say, hey, what do you know about Maxime Agostini? You may say, oh, if there's a name, like don't answer and say, no, I can't share anything on anyone. But then you have those like really bizarre kind of prompts that trigger some weird reactions, such as there was this example from, I think, end of last year, where if you asked ChatGPT to repeat poem forever, it would like enter this weird loop where at some point it would just start regurgitating some input data. It was like poem,
oh,
poem, poem,
wow.
poem, poem, poem. And after like 100 iterations, it would just be completely lost and say, well, and by the way, and something that had nothing to do with the prompt. So it was not a
Oh, wow.
technically like a
It's almost like it kind
privacy.
of recursively went back. It backpropped itself all the way to the beginning, down the neural
It's
chain,
I,
all the way back to the
I,
input
I
data.
can't say I
Wow.
understand what's happening in there.
Yeah.
It's kind of it got hypnosed or something. But for sure, it is something that's impossible to foresee.
Well, it's because
Uh,
those neural nets, they kind of loop back on themselves, right? And so if like you ask it to like recursively repeat itself, it's probably just jumping layers and layers and layers back. That's really interesting. And so yeah,
yeah,
how do you prevent data leakage in a world of large language models, because they're proliferating, right? I mean, there's seems to be a new one every day, right? With more and more parameters, more and more token size, and yeah, like how does privacy and what you guys do change in
so
the near future?
this usually I would say that there are two steps. Is like if you take a foundational model, uh, probably it's been trained on supposedly public data. So there's no like privacy liability at this stage.
Right.
The model, I mean, if you regurgitate something, it's probably public data, so that's supposedly okay. You have questions of IP, of course, so copyright is an issue, but like outside of this, it's kind of not the problem. If this, the problem comes in when you mix it with private data. So whether you mix it in the prompt through retrieval augmented generation, or if you fine tune the model on private data. There are several reasons to fine tune. You want to be better at your task. You want to work with a smaller model that might be less efficient. So you say, well, it might be less efficient off the shelf, but if I can fine tune it to this particular task, it can be pretty good. Well, if you do that, then you start mixing it with your private data, your tasks, and your day to day. That's really where you want to tackle the privacy issue, because if data makes it to the model, then you just have to pray for no one to come up with like a new weird attack. And
Well, I'm thinking about like medical diagnostics, right? So I think recently I was watching a video about, I think Google had a new one recently in the last week that can outperform doctors in diagnosing patients, right? Which begs the question, like, um, the input data, what was used and how was it anonymized? And so, like, it almost becomes more important to kind of think about the privacy of the input data rather than how it's retrieved, how it's outputted, right? In this case, it's almost like you have to look at the inputs and say, okay, well, we're going to feed it a bunch of charts, but those charts have anonymized hashes of IDs, so you don't know anything about the person other than maybe age and gender and all the different vitals. I would imagine now you have to kind of worry about that aspect of it. Like you said, there's two parts to it, right? The foundational models, yeah, it's public data, whatever. But when you get into these verticalized models for medical data or what have you,
Maybe you could speak to that.
Maybe you could speak to that, the input,
Regarding the
input,
So
the output and stuff.
yeah, so what we provide at Sarus is in the fine tuning step. We want to make sure that when you mix it with your own data doesn't make it to the model. Luckily, again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Same theory, differential privacy, and that's been applied to deep learning for a while. There's papers dating back like 8 years that explain a very powerful way of doing it. So now it's a matter of engineering and implementation. So we've taken all of this research again and put it in a box that anyone can easily deploy. So that protects the memorization, or makes sure that memorization is not granular enough. So data from one data point makes it to the model. There are other aspects of it. Sometimes it's like you put private information in the prompt, and you ask the model to come up with a recommendation, maybe come up with a diagnosis. In this case, a slightly different problem you're describing, because you do want to share user level information as a model. If you want a diagnosis on a record, you do want to share the record with all the details that could make sense. And maybe the details are very unique. Maybe this was one person who had those two pathologies. So the prompt is unique and describes uniquely this individual, and that should be acceptable because that's the only way to solve the problem. But then you want to turn to other technologies, and we're going back to input security probably. It's about like maybe you can do that in a confidential computing area where the prompt is sent in an encrypted fashion and the model could be encrypted and all happen in a confidential VM, for example. So this is not what we provide, but like there are complementary solutions. There are like the fully private LLM stack is being built today by like a bunch of startups. So it's a very exciting space to be in.
Yeah. So what's the inception story for Sarus? I love hearing kind of how you stumbled upon this idea and chose to leave your cushy corporate job to work on a startup.
So the three founders of Sarus are the exact same founders as the first company. And first company was in an industry where data was free for all to use, which is the ad tech industry. So we were on the media side, helping media companies monetize their inventory, and you could see that like a lot of this value would come from data. And we're designing algorithms and machine learning solutions so they can make more money. And this client was Microsoft at the time, and so working with like a lot of data, like actually having probably information, like processing in some way information from maybe a billion users or something. It was not necessarily very sensitive data. It was probably, hey, this person saw this ad or something like this, but still like billions of data points. And that started to shift this over, so of course there's GDPR, but like the few years prior, you could see that like people started to realize that this probably was not sustainable. And we thought of ourselves like, well, we don't want to know anything about those users. We just want to be able to design those algorithms that make sure that the media companies remain profitable. We don't want to have to know anything about them. We don't want to be the privacy liability here. We're designing models that we should not be in a position where we have access to this. So we started like thinking about like how we can solve this. Those technologies like differential privacy, synthetic data, were becoming more mature. So we started researching the topic, and at some point saying that, yeah, well, it's time to start over. because at that time we had been acquired by AOL/Verizon. So we had like even more potentially data to play with, but also more corporate limitations and friction. And we realized that we could solve it with a product. So started over, started from scratch. We united the team, and here we are.
Mm. That's amazing. I'd love to get your thoughts on, France versus the United States startup scene. It feels like France is really, especially in the last 5 years, burst on the scene a bit. I've seen quite a number of startups coming out of France. Maybe you could talk to you've been there firsthand, a little bit of that sea change.
So France has always had like a kind of a unique relationship with math, and for decades. When I was
centuries, really.
and if you look at this graph that
Yeah.
sometimes we pull out, where you have the number of fields metals per inhabitant, and France is such an outlier. That's like 10x the number of like every other country or something.
Wow.
Israel, I think, comes next or something like this. But then everyone else is like almost the same, and France is just top and right corner. So, and when I was coming out of school, like everyone would go to finance, and like all the best students would go to London and New York and so on. And so that a lot of talents that were going away and doing interesting things, but and there was not a lot of big startup scene, and that started to shift with probably a lot of investment also, including public money in the year 2010 and onward, and it started becoming like a lot of people starting like investing into startups, and France was really like a hot place. But not like it became really like red hot when the AI came in, because then you had this confluence of a lot of data talents, and it was like all very well advanced in mathematics and data and engineering, and a lot of investment in startups, and the two collided. And if there was just one company, you would say, well, okay, well, it's luck probably, but now there's like a handful of really good AI companies in Paris or in France, or with French founders. So that's becoming like real thing. Like it's becoming impactful at the country level. So it's fascinating to see like this change of scale.
Yeah, I love seeing it as an investor too. Like we invest worldwide and pretty geographically agnostic. So we'll invest in the best companies and founders wherever they are. And so it's delightful to see entrepreneurship and startups and tech being built outside of Silicon Valley and outside of California and outside the United States, especially, right? And you know, as Andreessen said, software's eating the world, and now AI is eating software and generating more software and making it easier and easier to create more software anywhere in the world. And then you combine that, like you said, with competitive differentiation and mathematical talent, and then you layer that on top of the AI wave, which is just math, right? Just layered nets of math, right? So that's really fascinating. Why don't we switch to like a rapid fire? What's a favorite book that influenced your career?
Didn't prepare that one. I don't think I read a lot of business oriented books, to be honest. I keep like reading
Be any
pure
book,
leisure.
yeah. It'd be like Sun Tzu or something like that.
So yeah, I don't. You know what? I don't have an answer to this one.
This is interesting. You don't have an answer because I've recently, and I think I've spoken about this on the podcast. I've kind of veered away from books recently, and I'm much more in reading the latest like research papers or watching videos about the latest research papers, watching talks or podcasts on the latest like research, cutting edge, what's going on. I find that books tend to be, especially because it feels like our economy and our technology is just moving so fast. Books are just out of date by the time you read them, unless they're like a timeless story. Like I'll read the biography on Elon Musk, which I really enjoyed, and I actually listen to while I'm out on walks in my neighborhood. Really great story, just fun to listen to. But if you read a book on AI, like it's already out of date, right? It's probably writing about Chat GPT 3.5 or something.
I agree. Like, and it's gotten even worse in the past year, in the sense that, like, if you're not on Twitter,
Yeah,
X, it's you're missing out on things, because that's really like where, like, the first, like, insights into the latest version of that model, or the community discusses like whether how this compares to that. So yeah, that's why I think I read classics. I don't know if I've had a lot of.
For me, it's YouTube. So my YouTube feed is like all like AI research, startup stuff, venture capital stuff, and like Warriors basketball stuff. But that's where I get all my information. It's all these like little 10 and 15-minute videos about new research papers that people are like covering. And so I'll just like, oh yeah, I'll tune into that, and where I'm getting a lot of my info these days. What's one technology you can't live without?
So I try to live with as little technology as I can, and I try to put my phone away as much as I can, my computer away as much as I can. So I try hard not to depend on any. Of course, I use a ton of technology, but I would say if there was one that came out like right here, I say, okay, well, I'll try to just not use it for the next month or something like this, as a severance strategy.
Yeah.
So of course my phone is here all the time and so on, but like I do try to cure this.
It's interesting. I tend to be a late adopter as well of technology, and my wife is who's not the techie person in the family. She'll be the first to buy the gadgets, which is really interesting. Like when the Pebble Watch came out, she was first to have it. I didn't have a smartwatch for years, and I still don't have one. I just have a Fitbit, and I've turned off notifications. But yeah, I tend to be kind of a late adopter, which is funny. I won't buy the latest and greatest. I am excited by the new Rabbit OS that I saw at CES. I saw the video on that. Did you see that? It's a company that redesigned the user interface around being able to talk to your computer. So it was like seeing the future. Like, oh, they're redesigning how humans interact with computers based on now that we can completely talk to computers and they can understand us and execute tasks for us. Unlike kind of chatbots from last generation, you think of Alexa and stuff like that. It could just do like simple question and answer stuff, or add something to your shopping list. Now that the AI is sufficiently talented enough where it can go order you an Uber or order you a pizza, or like go like execute tasks for you. Like, so it was a really interesting demo to watch. If you weren't in tech, what would you be doing?
Well, I think when I decided in careers, I had architecture and engineering, like considering both after engineering school, right? Like I think we had this passion for science, so that didn't really see alternatives. But yeah, that would have been a completely different path. Architecture or building cities or working like urban planning and stuff like this. Still very excited about this. And by the way, it kind of like loops back to tech nowadays. So I guess that's everything takes you back to tech now.
Yeah, me too. I think if I had a different life to live, I would have been an architect. I would have loved to design skyscrapers. I think that'd be like a really cool thing.
I haven't had any gift
story building or something. No, me neither. Not much of an artist.
It looks fun.
Well, here's kind of a custom one for you. Given you're in the privacy domain, what kind of steps do you take to protect your privacy that maybe the general population or most people don't do?
For example, incognito is very painful. I try to stick to it, and
oh, really? You have to log in every single time, and like there's no personalization.
We thank GDPR every day for having so many cookie consent pop-ups to click on.
Oh gosh, I have the Chrome extension where it just automatically accepts cookies.
Yeah.
I
So
never get the
it's a
pop-ups.
good one.
I just
I
got
have
tired of them.
I used cash like for a very long time. I
Hmm.
had to give up. I caved. But up until just a few years ago, I would just be dominantly using cash. Uh, I'm sad
Wow.
it's not
Hmm.
sustainable anymore, but I have to acknowledge it's not. So
Well, even some places now
yeah,
are like, we don't really take cash. Do you have a card? And I've been cash free for a long, long time, probably 20 years. I remember just being like, well, all I have is a card on me. I don't have any cash. So if you want my business, you got to charge this card for $1.79 for some drink or something. So speaking of classics, like what kind of classics do you recommend
to read.
to read?
So
Yeah, you said you'd like to read
yeah,
the
well,
classics. Yeah.
I read a lot of French classics. I've started looking into Proust
Mm.
recently, which I hadn't read. It's like a kind of a big discovery and or rediscovery sometimes. I
Yeah.
have a couple of English classics that had like a big impact on me. I'm not always able to read everything or probably I'm missing out on some of the depth from the language. But I know Jack Kerouac had a has big impact also when I
Mm.
read it like a long time ago. And I was like, oh wow, I can just write like completely different stories. And I had the same
Mm.
for Celine, for example, which is a French author, which is really like punches you in the face when you read it for the first time. So it's yeah, I like being surprised, and you can find like really really surprising things in classics that you don't expect.
Yeah. Turns out there's been lots of smart people thinking about lots of things for a long time, right? And you can learn a lot from, we're just, a blip on the human time scale even. So in closing, would love to hear your ideal customer profile, and if anybody's listening out there, how they should
So
get in touch.
we're talking to corporates mostly, like large companies that have private data, which is most of them do, but like do want to leverage it for with their whether their own research or data projects, or could be also monetization. So your data is probably valuable for someone else. That's often the case in marketing. It's also the case in many medical fields where you aggregate a lot of information. You serve research or market research from others. So we do solve this friction. So our ideal customer profile has this data has a scale. So that data set becomes valuable and it starts making sense to put a data scientist or two on it. Maybe they like the resources internally or they want to work with a partner. That's mostly, I would say, the main sectors are marketing, tech, healthcare, finance. Like there are other applications, national statistics, their mobility, like auto industry is a big, like is investing big on data in the future. But like as of today, those would be the top three.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation and learned a ton. And I know everyone will derive as much
Thanks,
benefit as I
Brian.
did.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah, I'm happy to continue the conversation on privacy and other topics with everyone on the show who's interested or curious.
Thanks so much.